right? We have done up to data manipulation language. We have done data definition language also. Then data manipulation language. Next is DCL, data control language. Data control language is just snip definition to khangu command do kai kai no hado hujiki unity khango ko. Have the huji example p bada do katang nungai giro koina. We haven't started properly the SQL, okay, structure query language. We haven't started properly. So let's give only the definitions. Sorry, not this one. Data controller language, DCL. Okay, DCL stands for data control language. Control means it's somehow related with the permission, okay, granted permission with the access authority, okay. So here it is used to retrieve the store or save data. So the DCL execution is transactional. It also has rollback parameter. Rollback means at some particular point, suppose अखोइना समना हादा अखोइना रोल बैक हादि मदनिंग हलकपा हाबने समना हाबदि जगा अमदा अखोइना मफम अमदा हलकपा हाइतारे खना मफम खरा चटलुरे नत्रगा अखोइना ट्रांजैक्शन एसक्यूएल जी सुम इरे इबदगी एरर खरा थोखरेगदि मनिंग साइ आइना ट्रांजैक्शन तब मतमदा और आइना ngasai क्वेरी इबा मतमदा अचुम्बा जगादो अदुदैदा हलकपा रोल बैक हादि मनिंग हलकपा को बैक तरोकपा रोल तौरगा हलकपा मनिंग हलकपा मीन्स आइना ngasai execute तौरमदा ट्रांजैक्शन दो अचुम्बा जगादुदैदा हलकपा ngasai एरर को कनो खरा थोखरे सनाइदा सिस्टम फेलर नि खंगदे नत्रगा कैगुम्बा असोइबा खरा को सेरियस खरा असोइबा खरा थोखरेबा थोगदि आइना उजिक कनोजे माइ मैस्कल जी याद्रेबा अदुइतादि आइना ngasai ममांगी प्रीवियस कराइबु जगा बौ यारमी आइना ट्रांजैक्शन तौबगी क्वेरी इबदा अदुगी जगा आमदा रोल बैक तरोपा हलकपा हाइदि आइना पॉइंट अमा कमिट काइनागा लैरमनेबको जगा अमा आइना फिक्स तौरमनेबा सेव तरो चटपा हाइतारे अदुई कमांड जु लै आइना लास्ट सेव तरोगा चटपा जगादो अदुबौदा हलकपा हाइतारे रोल बैक को अदा सेदा हाइजे here are some tasks that comes under the DCL. DCL the lakba, DCL the labor command ani si no ate khangdru DCL haita di data control language adu ita data control language da karamba kano yawi syntax yawi karamba command jing yawi habi khang ko adum multiple choice da adum hangba yai sida yawi je grant and revoke haiba ani je data control language ki magi command grant habdi grant means please grant me the leave ko habdi I leave pb yo habi adugi allow to biyo habani yahan biyo habani that means aina permission do need neba ko adumai dana se ju grant hadi it is used to give user access privilege to a database that means user amada permission piba hadi my database access to ba yabagi permission piba that is called the adumai kamaina pi gidage hai kanda grant haiba command sijinaga piba yaeba ko ki administrator na loimak set tawba yai sigi command jing je revoke hargana that permission taken back ko it is used to take back permissions from the user ngasai pigiba authority do hadi permission jo we can also remove once granted means it is not for always once it is granted after sometimes if I don't feel it is not good okay then I can remove the permission from that particular user that means you are not allowed to access our database the meaning is okay you cannot use anymore our database that is the revoke that means taking back the permission of using the database ko sina revoke haiba command sijinaga koina amuk my permission do lokthokpa yaiba ko these are the following operation which have the authorization of revoke ko authorized revoke the have the lokthokpa matamda kari permission do lokthokpa matamda kari command jing work toroidino haita di connect insert uses execute delete update select ꯁꯤꯒꯤꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯔꯤꯚꯣꯛ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯃꯇꯝꯗꯩꯗ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯑꯣꯄꯔꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯔꯤꯚꯣꯛ ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯅꯦꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯂꯧꯊꯣꯛꯈ꯭ꯔꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯃꯥꯅ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯔꯣꯏꯕ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯌꯨꯖꯔꯗꯨꯅ ꯑꯣꯀꯦ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯟꯗꯦꯛꯁꯤ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯔꯣꯏꯁꯤ ꯈꯔ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯧꯁꯤꯜꯂꯀꯥꯟꯗꯩꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ SQLꯗꯣ ꯐꯖꯅ ꯇꯧꯔꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯇꯧꯁꯤ ꯅꯦꯛꯁꯇ ꯂꯥꯛꯇꯣꯏꯁꯦ DCL ꯗ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯀꯟꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯜ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖ ꯀꯣ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯀꯟꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯜ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖꯇ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯕ ꯀꯃꯥꯟ ꯑꯅꯤꯗꯤ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯔꯣꯜ ꯕꯦꯛ ꯀꯣ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯔꯣꯜ ꯕꯦꯛ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯗ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯩ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯗꯨ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯏꯁꯥꯅ ꯌꯥꯖꯔꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯅꯨꯄꯤ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯅꯨꯄꯥ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯑꯦꯐꯤꯌꯔ ꯃꯥ ꯀꯃꯤꯠꯃꯦꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯐꯦꯁꯕꯨꯛꯀꯤ ꯏꯁꯇꯦꯇꯁꯇꯁꯨ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯀꯥꯏ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯏꯅꯗꯥꯏꯅꯦ ꯆꯞ ꯃꯥꯟꯅꯩꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯁꯤꯁꯨ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯗ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯖꯒꯥ ꯑꯃꯐꯥꯎꯁꯦ ꯃꯥꯅ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯊꯝꯃꯝꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯐꯥꯎꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯔꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯒꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ DCL is used to run changes made by the DML ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯦꯅꯤꯄꯨꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖꯇꯨꯅ ꯆꯦꯟꯖꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯕꯁꯤꯡꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯔꯟ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯀꯥꯟꯗꯩꯗ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯩ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯦꯅꯤꯄꯨꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯈꯤꯕꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ insert tꯧꯕ means suppose now I have in my student table student database I have only 10 rows after inserting 5 rows then means now 15 rows are there that means that also one kind of changes 하이디 rows 또 henkalak인ꯦꯕ then delete 하이로 delete 하이타주 ꯑꯩꯅ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ database ꯗꯣ 5 ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯕꯗꯒꯤ row 5 ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯕꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯑꯅꯤ ꯀꯛꯊꯠꯀꯗꯤ 3 ꯂꯩꯍꯧꯔꯦ that also one kind of changes then update ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯑꯩꯒꯤ ꯁꯦꯂꯔꯤꯗꯣ employee ꯁꯦꯂꯔꯤꯗꯣ 50,000 ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯝꯕꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ 20,000 ꯑꯃꯨꯛ +ꯧꯁꯟ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ update ꯇꯧꯁꯟ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ that is 70,000 that is one kind of changes ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ changes ꯀꯃꯥꯟꯁꯤꯡ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯤꯕ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯦꯅꯤꯄꯨꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖꯀꯤꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯁꯨ ꯆꯦꯟꯖ ꯇꯧꯍꯜꯂꯤ ꯆꯦꯟꯖ ꯇꯧꯍꯜꯂꯤꯕꯁꯤꯡꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯆꯦꯟꯖꯦꯁꯗꯨꯗ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯅꯦꯕ ꯆꯦꯟꯖꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯅꯦꯕ ꯏꯟꯁꯔꯠ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇꯨꯗ ꯇꯦꯕꯜꯗꯨꯗ ꯏꯟꯁꯔꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯜꯁꯣ ꯋꯥꯟ ꯀꯥꯏꯟ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯆꯦꯟꯖꯦꯁ ꯂꯥꯛꯍꯜꯂꯤꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ DCL is used to run changes run the changes made by the DML statement DML statementꯅ changes ꯇꯧꯍꯜꯂꯤꯕꯁꯤꯡꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯩꯗ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ that means insert that is also after inserting that is one kind of transaction then if we delete the rows using the delete command that also transaction okay like in the bank also suppose if you remove you withdraw money from the bank that is your transaction one kind of transaction and then if you deposit the money that also one kind of transaction okay so transaction ꯃꯌꯥꯝꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ changes DCML ꯅ work ꯇꯧꯋꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯃꯣꯏꯅ after inserting two rows ꯑꯩꯅ commit ꯑꯩꯅ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯖꯒꯥꯗꯣ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯃꯒꯗꯤ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯗꯣ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ it is related to the DML statementꯁꯤꯡꯗꯨꯒ relate ꯇꯧꯋꯦ ꯃꯔꯤ ꯂꯩꯅꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯀꯣ DCL can be grouped into a logical transaction there are some tasks that come under DCL DCLꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯄ tasks ꯈꯔꯗꯤ job ꯈꯔꯗꯤ that is commit and rollback ꯅꯦꯕ commit ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ at some point at some transaction after doing some transaction if I set the commit that means I save at that moment at that part my database is I am keeping it safe ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯅ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯕꯤꯔꯝꯕꯒ ꯆꯞ ꯃꯥꯟꯅꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯈꯪꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯐꯥꯏꯜꯗ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯋꯥꯔꯗ ꯈꯔ ꯏꯁꯜꯂꯒ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇꯁꯨ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯆꯦꯟꯖꯦꯁ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯗꯣ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯕ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯕꯤꯔꯝꯕ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇꯣ ꯑꯗ ꯖꯒꯥꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯃꯤꯅ ꯍꯣꯔꯦꯟ ꯑꯥꯐꯇꯔ ꯁꯝ ꯇꯥꯏꯝ ꯑꯦꯔꯔ ꯊꯣꯛꯂꯛꯑꯒꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯕ ꯖꯒꯥꯗꯨꯗ ꯔꯣꯜ ꯕꯦꯛ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯅꯕ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯀꯟꯇꯤꯅ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯇꯧꯅ ꯌꯥꯅꯕ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯀꯃꯥꯟꯗꯣ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯁꯦꯔꯥꯟ ꯇꯨꯔꯥꯟ ꯏꯁꯟꯈꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯏꯟꯐꯥꯏꯅꯥꯏꯠ ꯂꯨꯞ ꯆꯠꯄꯅꯤ ꯈꯪꯗꯦ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟꯗꯣ ꯇꯧ ꯌꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯕ ꯅꯦꯛꯁ ꯀꯃꯥꯟꯗꯣ ꯇꯧ ꯌꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ instead of facing those problems or instead of continuing those problems I can roll back to the previous transaction. Previous transaction means which I have saved, which I use the commit command. Okay, save ꯇꯧꯅꯕꯒꯤ transaction part jaga amada adudi halakba. Aduna that is called the rollback. Rollback it is used to restore. So the system restore tawbaga samana eba khambra nangi yarammiba jaga to restore tawbado. The database to originate since the last commit. ꯂꯥꯁ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯂꯥꯁ ꯈ꯭ꯋꯥꯏ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯃꯇꯨꯡ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯕꯗꯨꯅꯤ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯕꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯅꯣꯟ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯗ ꯀꯃꯤꯠ ꯑꯣꯀꯦ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯡꯁꯤꯕꯨ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖ ꯀꯧꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯁꯤ ꯈꯔ ꯈꯔꯗꯤ ꯇꯧꯔꯦ ꯇꯧꯔꯒꯁꯨ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯑꯩ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯀꯟꯇꯤꯅ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯅ ꯁꯤꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯗꯅ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯗꯩꯗ ꯈꯔ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ ꯍꯧꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯗꯩꯗ ꯈꯔ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ ꯍꯧꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯀꯟꯇꯤꯅ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯚ꯭ꯌꯨꯁ ꯀꯥꯏꯗ ꯇꯧꯁꯜꯂꯒ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯒꯔꯒꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯇꯧꯁꯜꯂꯒ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯉꯥꯏꯈꯣ ꯆꯣꯡꯈꯤꯔꯣꯏꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯒꯤꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯕ ꯆꯣꯡꯕꯁꯦ ꯈꯪꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯀꯟꯁꯇꯦꯟꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯇꯧꯗ꯭ꯔꯤ ꯆꯣꯡꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯒꯤ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯗ ꯈꯤꯇꯪ ꯋꯥꯠꯂꯤꯑꯦꯕ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯗ ꯑꯅꯤꯃꯛ ꯀꯝꯕꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯕꯅꯤꯅ ꯑꯅꯤꯃꯛꯀꯤ ꯈꯔ ꯌꯦꯡꯉ ꯆꯠꯇ ꯌꯥꯗꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯗ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯒꯤꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯑꯩ ꯑꯦꯁꯥꯏꯟꯃꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯄꯤꯔꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯁꯔꯚꯔ ꯑꯥꯔꯀꯤꯇꯦꯛꯆꯔꯒ ꯁꯦꯟꯇ꯭ꯔꯦꯂꯥꯏꯁ ꯑꯥꯔꯀꯤꯇꯦꯛꯆꯔꯅꯦ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯤꯐꯤꯀꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯃꯦꯅꯦꯖꯃꯦꯟ ꯁꯤꯁꯇꯦꯝ ꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯄꯥꯔꯒ ꯌꯥꯕ ꯏꯆꯝ ꯆꯝꯕ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯅꯤꯁꯤꯗꯩ ꯅꯣꯏꯗ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯁꯥꯏꯟꯃꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯄꯤꯔꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯁꯕꯃꯤꯠ ꯇꯧꯅꯕꯒꯤꯗꯃꯛꯇ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯒꯤ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯗꯗꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 4ꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯋꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯀꯥꯡꯕꯨꯁꯦ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯒꯤꯁꯤ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔꯁꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯈꯪꯕ ꯑꯃ ꯗꯔꯀꯥꯔ ꯂꯩ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯒꯤꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯀꯤꯗ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯐꯣꯔꯦꯟ ꯀꯤ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯈꯪꯈꯤꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯏꯕ ꯃꯇꯝꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯇꯦꯕꯜꯗ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯁꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯅ ꯐꯣꯔꯦꯟ ꯀꯤ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯁꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯅꯤꯒ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯀꯥꯟꯗꯩꯗ ꯐꯣꯔꯦꯟ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯍꯟꯅ ꯀꯣꯏꯁꯟꯗꯣ ꯍꯪꯉꯛꯇꯅꯕꯒꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔꯒꯤ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯁꯤꯃ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯂꯩꯈꯤꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯁꯤꯃ ꯂꯩꯈꯤꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯑꯜꯖꯕ꯭ꯔꯥꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯗꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯗꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯗ ꯑꯝꯇꯪ ꯌꯦꯡꯒꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯗꯗꯤ
ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯑꯜꯖꯕ꯭ꯔꯥꯒ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯀꯦꯜꯀꯨꯂꯁꯀ ꯌꯥꯎꯋꯦ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯗ
ꯑꯗꯨ ꯁꯤ ꯅꯣꯏꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯀꯔꯥꯏꯋꯥꯏꯗꯅꯣ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ
ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯗ
ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯗ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ 2ꯒꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯅꯣꯏꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯇꯧꯈꯠꯂꯛꯑꯦꯕ ꯈꯪꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ
ꯎꯝ
ꯁꯤꯂꯦꯕꯁ ꯑꯅꯤꯁꯦ ꯄꯨꯔꯥ ꯑꯣꯔꯗꯔ ꯑꯃꯐꯥꯎ ꯅꯥꯏꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯕ ꯑꯃꯗꯅ ꯑꯃ ꯖꯒꯥ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯏꯟꯁꯤꯜꯂꯦ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯖꯒꯥ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯏꯟꯁꯤꯜꯂꯦꯕ ꯏꯁꯄꯦꯁꯤꯐꯤꯛ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯏꯁꯄꯦꯁꯤꯐꯤꯛ ꯑꯣꯔꯗꯔ ꯈꯔꯗꯤ ꯅꯥꯏꯒꯗꯕꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ
ꯎꯝ
ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯒꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ
ꯎꯝ
ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯑꯜꯖꯕ꯭ꯔꯥꯒꯤ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯀꯗꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤꯂꯦꯕꯁꯁꯤꯁꯨ ꯈꯤꯇꯪ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯝ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯑꯕ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯣꯔꯗꯔ ꯈꯤꯇꯪ ꯃꯑꯣꯡ ꯇꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯤꯑꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔꯁꯦ ꯁꯨꯡꯌꯥꯎ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯕ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯝ ꯇꯧꯔꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯍꯦꯟꯁ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯌꯥꯎꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯌꯥꯎꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔꯁꯤꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯃꯈꯥꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯦ ꯅꯣꯏꯅ ꯍꯣꯏ ꯇꯥꯛꯄꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯩ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯨꯗ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯂꯦꯡꯒ꯭ꯋꯦꯖ ꯇꯥꯛꯄꯗ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯁꯝꯊꯈꯤꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔꯒꯤ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯁꯤꯃ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠ ꯌꯥꯎꯔ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯇꯧꯕꯅ ꯐꯩꯌꯦꯕ ꯑꯩ ꯅꯍꯥꯟ ꯍꯧꯈꯤꯕꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯖꯁ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯀ꯭रिꯌꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯈꯣꯠꯂꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯇꯣ ꯅꯣꯏꯗ ꯈꯪꯗ꯭ꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯀ꯭रिꯌꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯅꯤ ꯑꯗ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯞꯄꯅꯤꯅ ꯄꯨꯡꯉꯥꯡꯗ ꯉꯥꯡꯕꯗꯣ ꯅꯨꯡꯉꯥꯏꯇꯕꯒꯤ ꯅꯣꯏꯗ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯑꯦꯗꯚꯥꯟꯁ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯝꯕꯤꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯦꯕ ꯁꯝ ꯕꯦꯁꯤꯛ ꯀꯃꯥꯟ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯝꯕꯤꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯁꯤꯀꯣ
ꯌꯥꯏ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯇꯧꯕꯅꯗꯤ ꯐꯕꯅꯤ ꯇꯧꯕꯁꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯁꯤ ꯇꯧꯔꯕ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯑꯜꯖꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯀꯥꯜꯀꯨꯂꯁ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕꯅꯦ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯃꯇꯨꯡꯗ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗꯗꯤ
ꯌꯥꯏꯌꯦ
ꯑꯗꯣ
ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯦꯁ ꯀ꯭ꯌꯨ ꯑꯦꯜꯁꯤꯅ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯆꯠꯊꯈ꯭ꯔꯁꯨ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯇꯥꯛꯄꯗ ꯃꯀꯣꯛꯇꯒꯤ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯕ ꯍꯧꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯅꯨꯡꯉꯥꯏꯇꯕꯩ ꯈꯔ ꯆꯣꯡꯊꯣꯛ ꯆꯣꯡꯁꯤꯟ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯤ ꯀꯩꯁꯨꯗꯤ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯦ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯅꯦꯛꯁꯇ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯇꯧꯔꯁꯤ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯀꯣ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯉꯍꯥꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠꯇꯤ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯃꯆꯥ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯕ ꯃꯥꯜꯂꯤ ꯉꯍꯥꯟ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯁꯇ ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯕ ꯃꯥꯜꯂꯦꯀꯣ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯅꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯅꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯃꯔꯤ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯁꯦꯃꯤ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯛꯆꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯅꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯁꯨ ꯀꯩꯗꯧꯗꯥꯏꯅꯦ ꯍꯦꯔꯥꯔꯀꯤꯀꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯈꯔ ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯑꯣरिꯌꯦꯟꯇꯦꯠ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ
ꯑꯣꯕꯖꯦꯛ
ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ
ꯑꯣꯔꯤꯌꯦꯟꯇꯦꯠ
ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ 3 ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯁꯦ ꯌꯥꯎꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯅꯦ ꯑꯩ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯒꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯒꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯤꯐꯤꯀꯦꯁꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯉꯍꯥꯟ ꯑꯩꯅ 5-6 ꯇꯧꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯂꯥꯏꯔꯤꯛ ꯈꯔꯗꯅ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯁꯤꯗꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯁꯇꯣ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯏꯔꯛꯇꯦ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯁꯤꯗꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯂꯣꯖꯤꯀꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯆꯨꯋꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯐꯤꯖꯤꯀꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯎꯕꯅꯤ ꯂꯥꯏꯔꯤꯛ ꯈꯔꯗꯅ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯤꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯒꯗꯤ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯃꯣꯏꯅ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯣ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯅꯦꯜ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯗꯥꯇꯥ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯂꯥꯛꯏ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯈꯤꯇꯪ ꯀꯣꯛꯇ ꯂꯩꯌꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯍꯧꯔꯁꯤ ER that is entity relationship model ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯀꯣ entity relationship model stands for an entity relationship model haiba. It is high level data model. High level data model haitadi maji conceptual data model ni ko. Adi maji overall design concept to. Adi da lakadaba logical da lakadaba ko. It is a high data model. This model is used to define data elements and the relationship for a specified system. Ko. Adi sigi relationship sina karino define tawdoido magi data elements hai data jingduga data elements hai data yauriba information jingduni data elements jingduga aduga atopa haidi aduga amaga data amga ko haidi meri relation du kamai lege specified model amgi haidi specified system amgi haidi specified projection haidi student management system hairo adu specified kanoni system amani haidi particular system amagi data elements jingdugi relation do utpane samna haida entity amga relation utpane ba entity haita di kai haino entity haita di it can be reality da exist tawba ko samna hai it can be concept or joy entity habaje entity ki definition su lakhini symbols of entity model or entity se hore lakhini ko definition yare silare adagi ER model ji kaino hai that means the conceptual design duni samna hai database ama ngahanju haigrabani aina kaino data model tawba matamda model habdi kaino aduga ER model habdi kaino to haigrabani that means kaino do ngasai diagram in the form of a diagram da represent tawba ko ngasai table and the rows ki relation haigra table column and the rows ki form da taroga table ki form da represent tawba like ER hagana entity relationship data elements do amaga kamai relation laini in the form of a diagram gi through the of database gi whole concept to design tawba ko like aina habdo sai building ama sata di yumam sata gi magi hana sketch hana tawi habdo adumaina saida magi relation sing je kamaina tawgadage habdo through a entity through a haidi entity haji rectangular box na represent tawi mai symbol khara lakhini adugi symbol jing sijinaraga in the form of a diagram amoina represent tawba model do utpa that is called the entity relationship it developed a conceptual design for a database. It also developed a very simple and easy to design view of the data. In the ER modeling, the database structure is portrayed as a diagram called an entity relationship diagram between the data element and the relationship in the form of a diagram that represent that is called the ER diagram. See example of this ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯁꯤ ꯏꯆꯝ ꯆꯝꯕ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯁꯤꯝꯄꯜ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯎꯠꯂꯤꯁꯦ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯗꯇꯥ ꯃꯌꯥꯝꯗꯣ ꯍꯥꯞꯄꯤꯕꯗꯨꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯇꯦꯕꯜꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯁꯦ ꯏꯌꯥꯔꯁꯦ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯁꯄꯣꯁ ꯋꯤ ꯗꯤꯖꯥꯏꯟ ꯑꯦ ꯁ꯭ꯀꯨꯜ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯁ꯭ꯀꯨꯜ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯗꯤꯖꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯦ ꯏꯟ ꯗꯤꯁ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯗ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯠ ꯋꯤꯜ ꯕꯤ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯗꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯅꯤ ꯋꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁ ꯂꯥꯏꯛ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯅꯍꯥꯟ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯣꯄꯔꯇꯤꯗꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯀꯂꯝꯗꯣ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯗ ꯐꯤꯜꯗꯣ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯅꯪ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯋꯥꯈꯟꯗ ꯈꯜꯂꯨ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯑꯦ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯈꯜꯂꯨ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯑꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯈꯜꯂꯨ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯑꯣꯏꯗꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯋꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯗ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯋꯤꯜ ꯕꯤ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯁꯤꯅꯦꯕ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯄꯤꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯦꯕ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯇꯦꯕꯜꯒꯤ ꯐꯣꯝꯗ ꯑꯣꯟꯊꯣꯔꯛꯀꯦ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯀ꯭ꯋꯥꯔꯤ ꯏꯔꯛꯀꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯀ꯭रिꯌꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯠ ꯋꯤꯜ ꯕꯤ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯋꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯂꯥꯏꯛ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯀꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯣꯄꯔꯇꯤ ꯑꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯣꯄꯔꯇꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯅꯦ ꯅꯦꯝꯅꯦ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯗꯤꯅꯦ ꯑꯦꯖꯅꯦ ꯑꯦꯛꯁꯤꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯅꯪ SQL ꯏꯔꯀꯥꯟꯗꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯇ ꯈꯜꯂꯣ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯣꯝ ꯇꯧ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯣꯄꯔꯇꯤ ꯈꯔꯗꯤ ꯂꯩꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯀꯂꯝ ꯈꯔꯗꯤ ꯂꯩꯅꯤ ꯀꯂꯝꯗꯣ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁ ꯂꯥꯏꯛ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯅꯦ ꯃꯃꯤꯡꯅꯦ ꯑꯥꯏꯗꯤꯅꯦ ꯑꯦꯖꯅꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯗ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯕꯤ ꯑꯅꯗꯔ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯋꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁ ꯂꯥꯏꯛ ꯁꯤꯇꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯠ ꯅꯦꯝ ꯄꯤꯟ ꯀꯣꯗ ꯑꯦꯛꯁꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯁꯦ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯛꯄꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯃꯜꯇꯤꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯤ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯅꯪ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔꯁꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯀꯥꯟꯗꯗꯤ ꯅꯪ ꯈꯪꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯈꯪꯉꯦ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔ ꯀꯔꯥꯏꯋꯥꯏꯗꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔ ꯑꯋꯥꯡ ꯂꯩꯀꯥꯏ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯂꯩꯀꯥꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯒꯤ ꯄꯤꯟ ꯀꯣꯗ ꯂꯣꯏ ꯆꯪꯉꯛꯇ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯕꯤ ꯐꯥꯔꯗꯔ ꯁꯕ ꯗꯤꯚꯥꯏꯗꯦꯠ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯃꯈꯥꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯛꯀꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯗꯤꯌꯔ ꯋꯤꯜ ꯕꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯕꯤꯇ꯭ꯋꯤꯟ ꯗꯦꯝ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯖꯁ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜ ꯑꯃꯈꯛ ꯄꯤꯕꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯁꯤ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯌꯦꯛꯀꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯃꯆꯥ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯦꯛꯁꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯌꯦꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯁꯤꯗ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯤꯕ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯤꯡꯁꯤ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯨ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯦ ꯔꯥꯎꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯁꯤꯝꯄꯜꯅꯤ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯎꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄꯒ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯖꯁ ꯋꯤ ꯍꯦꯚ ꯑꯣꯡꯂꯤ ꯇꯨ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁ ꯍꯤꯌꯔ ꯋꯤ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯌꯨꯖꯤꯡ ꯁꯤꯅ ꯐ꯭ꯂꯣꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯔꯣꯁꯤꯅ ꯐ꯭ꯂꯣ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯇꯣꯛꯈꯣ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯀꯣꯟꯅ ꯂꯥꯛꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯔꯣꯒꯤꯅ ꯀꯣꯟꯅ ꯂꯥꯛꯁꯤ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯕꯁꯤ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯀꯤꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯩꯌꯦ ꯑꯣꯡꯂꯤ ꯇꯨ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯅꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯑꯣꯕꯦꯜ ꯁꯦꯞ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯇꯣꯛꯈ꯭ꯔꯣ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯃꯈꯥꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯀꯩꯀꯩ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯁꯤꯕꯨ ꯀꯩ ꯀꯧꯏ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯀꯧꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯁꯦ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯑꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯑꯃꯅꯁꯨ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯈꯪꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯤꯗ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯑꯅꯤ ꯂꯩꯌꯦꯕ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯇꯣꯉꯥꯟꯅ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯝꯅ ꯄꯤꯅꯗꯦ ꯅꯪꯅ ꯄꯤꯒꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯁꯨ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯒ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯆꯞ ꯃꯥꯟꯅꯅꯤ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯤ ꯃꯥ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯁꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯩ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣꯗ ꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯨꯏꯁ ꯍꯦꯚꯤꯡ ꯑꯦ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯩꯌꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯑꯦꯕ꯭ꯔꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯈꯨꯗꯤꯡꯃꯛꯇ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯑꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯑꯃꯃꯝ ꯂꯩꯖꯩ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯏꯠ ꯁꯦꯜꯐ ꯏꯖ ꯑꯦ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯗꯤ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯃꯥꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯇꯣꯉꯥꯟꯕ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯇꯣꯉꯥꯟꯅ ꯌꯦꯛꯇꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯅ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯑꯁꯣꯟꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯑꯁꯣꯟꯕ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯅꯥꯅꯣꯝꯗ ꯗꯤꯄꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯐꯝ ꯊꯣꯛꯇ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯑꯁꯣꯟꯕ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯁꯣꯟꯕꯁꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯨꯏꯁ ꯀꯦꯅꯣꯠ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯦꯟ ꯑꯂꯣꯟ ꯃꯁꯥ ꯃꯊꯟꯇ ꯂꯦꯞꯄ ꯉꯝꯖꯗꯕ ꯀꯣ ꯏꯠ ꯗꯤꯄꯦꯟꯁ ꯑꯣꯟ ꯗꯤ ꯑꯅꯗꯔ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯗꯤꯄꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯀꯧꯏꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯗꯗꯤ ꯃꯥ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯉꯝꯗꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯃꯥ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯔꯣꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯃꯉꯣꯟꯗꯗꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯃꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯃꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯔꯣꯏ ꯄꯥꯔꯁꯦꯜ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯂꯥꯛꯀꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯣꯟꯅ ꯗꯦꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯂꯥꯛꯀꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛꯀꯤꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯤ ꯅꯪ ꯈꯪꯉꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯅ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯁ꯭ꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯅ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯃꯅꯨꯡꯗ ꯑꯃ ꯃꯄꯥꯟꯗ ꯑꯃꯁꯨ ꯂꯩꯀꯣ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞꯁꯦ ꯀꯔꯤꯅ ꯁꯝꯅꯗꯣꯏꯅꯣ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯣꯏꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯃꯟ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯃꯟ ꯁꯦꯞꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯒꯗꯒꯦꯗ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯗꯥꯏꯃꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯅꯤ ꯃꯗꯨꯗꯣ ꯋꯤꯛꯅꯦꯕ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯑꯥꯏꯗꯦꯟꯇꯤꯐꯥꯏꯌꯤꯡ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞꯁꯨ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞꯁꯨ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯈꯦꯠꯅꯩ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯈꯪꯅꯩ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯀꯤ ꯃꯈꯥꯗ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯏꯔꯦ ꯃꯃꯤꯡ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯏꯔꯦ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯗꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯗꯤ ꯃꯈꯥꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯃꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯅꯣꯟ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯗ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯃꯔꯨꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯩ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯏꯝꯄꯣꯔꯇꯦꯟ ꯁꯣꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯝꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯤꯗ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯔꯥꯎꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯝꯃꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯝꯃꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯃꯜꯇꯤꯄꯜ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯂꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯦ ꯃꯣꯔ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯋꯥꯟ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯅ ꯌꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛꯀꯥꯟ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯕꯨ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯄꯥꯏꯕ꯭ꯔꯅꯦ ꯄꯥꯏꯗꯦ ꯅꯣꯏꯁꯨ
ꯄꯥꯏꯗꯦ
ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯤ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯑꯃꯅ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯂꯣꯏ ꯄꯥꯏꯔꯝꯃꯣꯏ ꯂꯣꯏ ꯑꯅꯤ ꯑꯍꯨꯝ ꯄꯥꯏꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯄꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯍꯥ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯃꯔꯛꯇ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯄꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ꯭ꯔꯕ
ꯌꯥꯎꯋꯦ
ꯌꯥꯎꯋꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯅꯪ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯁꯤꯟꯁꯤꯌꯔ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯅꯪꯉꯣꯟꯗꯗꯤ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯄ꯭ꯂꯥꯏ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯔꯣꯏ ꯅꯪꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯡꯒꯜ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯣꯏꯕ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯀꯦꯁꯇꯗꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯥꯎꯟ ꯑꯃꯈꯛ ꯀꯣꯟꯗꯣꯏꯕ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯦꯝꯃꯨ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯅꯃꯤꯡꯗ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯦꯝ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯇ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯌꯥꯎꯔ ꯍꯥꯄꯛꯀꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯇꯦꯕꯜꯗ ꯅꯪꯒꯤꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯤꯡ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯒꯗ ꯁꯤꯡꯒꯜ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯀꯧꯔꯛꯇꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯤ ꯀꯃꯟꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤꯅ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯕ꯭ꯔꯤ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯅꯥꯎꯑꯦꯗꯦꯁ ꯑꯦꯕ꯭ꯔꯤ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯅꯥꯎꯑꯦꯗꯦꯁꯀꯤ ꯋꯥ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯃꯃꯥꯡꯉꯩꯗꯁꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯦ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯀꯣ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯇꯦꯠ ꯇꯨ ꯁꯝ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯈꯔꯗ ꯃꯜꯇꯤꯄꯜ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯑꯅꯤ ꯑꯍꯨꯝ ꯁꯨꯕ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯀꯩꯅ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯩ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯗꯕꯜ ꯏꯂꯤꯞ ꯁꯥꯏꯟꯅ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯅꯦꯛꯁꯇ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯈꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯏꯠ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯕꯤ ꯐꯥꯗꯔ ꯁꯕ ꯗꯤꯚꯥꯏꯗꯦꯠ ꯀꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯗꯤꯚꯥꯏꯠ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯁꯦ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔꯗ ꯂꯩꯀꯥꯏ ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯂꯦꯟꯃꯥꯔꯛ ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯃꯆꯥ ꯊꯣꯡꯅꯗꯒꯤ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯄꯤꯟ ꯀꯣꯗ ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ
ꯍꯥꯎꯁ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯨ
ꯍꯥꯎꯁ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯂꯩꯔꯅꯤ ꯂꯦꯟ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯠ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯂꯩꯗꯅꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯊꯨꯒꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯇꯨꯕꯨ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯅꯪ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯅꯪ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔꯗ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯥꯟꯆꯤꯄꯨꯔꯒꯤ ꯂꯩꯀꯥꯏ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯁꯤꯗꯅ ꯄꯤꯟ ꯀꯣꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯠ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯍꯥꯎꯁ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯊꯨꯒꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤꯅ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯗꯣꯇꯦꯠ ꯂꯥꯏꯟꯁꯤꯅ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯗꯣꯇꯦꯠ ꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯅꯠꯇꯦꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯡꯒꯜ ꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯥꯎꯟ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯀꯣꯟꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯗꯣꯠ ꯀꯣꯜꯂꯛꯑꯅꯤ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯥꯟꯁꯤꯗ ꯁꯤ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄꯗꯒꯤ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯍꯣꯠꯄ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯒ ꯊꯩꯗꯣꯔꯛꯄ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯆꯍꯤ ꯍꯣꯠꯀꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯆꯍꯤ ꯍꯣꯠꯀꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯤꯄꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯟ ꯀꯥꯏꯗ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯑꯣꯟ ꯀꯥꯏꯗ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯀꯅꯤ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠꯇ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯑꯣꯏꯗ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯃꯇꯝꯗ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯑꯃ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠ ꯍꯥꯞꯆꯤꯜꯂꯒ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠ ꯍꯥꯞꯄꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯖꯁꯤ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯍꯣꯠꯀꯅꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠꯇꯨꯗ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯔ ꯍꯣꯠꯀꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯀꯦꯁꯇꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯖꯁꯦ ꯅꯪꯅ ꯗꯣꯇꯦꯠ ꯂꯥꯏꯟꯅ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯔꯛꯀꯅꯦꯕ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣꯗ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯏꯁ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯐ꯭ꯔꯣꯝ ꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯄꯨꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯦ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯄꯥꯔꯁꯤꯌꯦꯜ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯗꯣꯇꯦꯠ ꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯒ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯒꯗꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯔꯥꯎꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯒ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯩ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯞꯀꯦ ꯇꯧꯈꯤꯕꯅꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯐꯔꯦ ꯇꯣꯛꯑ ꯀꯣꯟꯅ ꯎꯜꯂꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯦꯛꯄꯗ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯕ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯅꯤ ꯅꯦꯛꯁꯇ ꯀꯩ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯁꯤꯒꯦ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟꯁ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯁꯤ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯀꯔꯤꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯒꯠꯂꯤꯅꯣ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟꯁꯤ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯄꯤꯛꯄ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯄꯤꯛꯄ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯣꯏꯈ꯭ꯔꯦꯅ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯅꯠꯇꯕ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯤꯗꯅ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕꯨꯠ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯍꯥꯞꯄꯝꯗ꯭ꯔꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯃꯇꯝꯗ ꯃꯥꯒꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯀꯩ ꯌꯥꯎꯒꯗꯒꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯀꯥꯟꯗꯩꯗ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯇꯣꯞꯄ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯇꯧꯒꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯒ ꯁꯝꯅꯅꯕꯒꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯃꯟ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯨꯝꯕꯁꯤꯡꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯗꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜꯗ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯈꯪꯉꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯇꯨꯗ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯈꯥꯏꯗꯣꯛꯈꯤꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯎꯠꯅꯕꯒꯤꯀꯣ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯦꯠꯇ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠ ꯅꯦꯠꯇꯒꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯊꯠꯂꯧ ꯂꯧꯔꯁꯤꯅꯦ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯒꯦ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯩ ꯇꯧꯍꯧꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯌꯦꯛꯍꯧꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯅꯦꯠꯇ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯍꯦꯛ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯃꯇꯝꯗ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯅꯦꯠꯇ ꯂꯧꯔꯒꯦꯕ ꯑꯩꯁꯦ ꯀꯣꯄꯤ ꯗ ꯏꯃꯦꯖ ꯀꯣ ꯃꯥꯏ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯆꯨꯝꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯌꯦꯡꯁꯦꯕ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯄꯤꯁꯇ ꯋꯥꯗꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯣꯏ ꯂꯧꯔꯁꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯎꯏꯀꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯎꯠꯂꯒꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯎꯏꯀꯣ ꯎꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯅꯣꯏ
ꯎꯏꯌꯦ ꯎꯏꯌꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯅꯦꯕ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯑꯦ ꯀꯝꯄꯅꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯅꯦꯕ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯗ ꯀꯩꯀꯩ ꯌꯥꯎꯏ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯁꯤ ꯃꯌꯥꯝꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯁꯤ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 2ꯗ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯣ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯊꯥꯔꯗꯠꯇ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯎꯠꯅꯕꯒꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯃꯟ ꯕꯣꯛꯁ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯝꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 1ꯗ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 2ꯗ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 3ꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯏꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯏꯌꯥꯔ ꯃꯣꯗꯦꯜ ꯍꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟ ꯑꯍꯨꯝꯁꯤꯅꯦꯕ ꯃꯉꯣꯟꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯅꯦꯟꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯗꯨꯗ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯃꯈꯜꯁꯦ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯂꯩ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡꯖꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯃꯁꯥꯃꯛꯁꯤ ꯏꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯅꯦꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯠ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯃꯈꯜꯁꯦ ꯑꯃꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯁꯤꯗꯩꯗ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯋꯤꯛ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯈꯛꯇꯪ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯃꯨꯛ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯤꯗ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯈꯥꯏꯗꯣꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯇ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏꯗ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃꯗ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛꯀꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯎꯠꯈꯤꯕ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯗꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯦꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤꯒꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯁꯤ ꯀꯥꯏꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯗꯣ ꯀꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯦ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯃ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯤꯗ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯈꯥꯏꯗꯣꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯇꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯁꯦ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯐꯔꯗꯔ ꯁꯕ ꯗꯤꯚꯥꯏꯗꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯃꯥꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯀꯩ ꯀꯧꯒꯦꯗ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯀꯧꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯌꯥꯎꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯌꯦꯡꯁꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯎꯠꯄꯗꯨꯏꯗ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯃꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯇꯧꯁꯜꯂꯦ ꯃꯥꯅ ꯐꯥꯗꯔ ꯁꯕ ꯗꯤꯚꯥꯏꯗꯦꯠ ꯇꯧꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯃꯥ ꯀꯝꯄꯣꯖꯤꯠ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯌꯥꯎꯍꯟꯗꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯌꯥꯎꯍꯟꯒꯦꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯌꯥꯎꯍꯜꯂꯣꯏꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗꯤ ꯌꯥꯎꯍꯟꯒꯗꯕꯅꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒ ꯄꯥꯔꯇꯤꯀꯨꯂꯔ ꯃꯐꯝ ꯑꯃꯈꯛ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒ ꯍꯦꯛꯇ ꯌꯥꯕ ꯅꯠꯇꯦꯀꯣ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯈꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯃꯜꯇꯤꯄꯜ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯐꯣꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯣꯜ ꯗ ꯃꯜꯇꯤ ꯚꯦꯂꯨ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠꯇꯒꯤ ꯗꯤꯔꯥꯏꯞ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯏꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯕꯥꯔꯠꯇꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯁꯦ ꯁꯦꯝꯃꯛꯏꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯗ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩ 1:1 1:1 ꯀꯣ 1:many 1:m many to 1 m:1 ꯀꯣ many to many m:m ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯁꯤꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ 1 by 1 ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯄꯤꯔꯛꯁꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯐꯥꯔꯁꯇ ꯋꯥꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯗꯒꯤ ꯄꯜꯂꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯋꯥꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯑꯦꯛꯆꯨꯑꯦꯜ ꯗꯤꯐꯤꯅꯤꯁꯟ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ an entity may be an object ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ or maybe a class ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ or maybe a person or place ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ or conceptꯁꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯑꯕꯀꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯑꯃ ꯀꯣꯔꯁꯀ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯀꯣꯔꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯛꯆꯨꯋꯦꯂꯤ ꯀꯣꯔꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯤꯕꯨ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯂꯩꯕ꯭ꯔꯅꯦ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗ ꯂꯩꯇꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯀꯣꯔꯁ BCA ꯀꯣꯔꯁ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗ ꯔꯤꯌꯦꯂꯤꯇꯤꯗꯗꯤ ꯂꯩꯕꯗꯤ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯕ ꯀꯣꯔꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯒꯠꯄꯅꯦꯕ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯇꯨꯒꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯄ꯭ꯂꯦꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯏꯟ ꯗ ꯏꯌꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯕꯤ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟꯇꯦꯠ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯜꯅ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯩ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯄꯔꯁꯟꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯩ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯄꯔꯁꯟꯁꯤꯗ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯣ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯁꯦ ꯀꯅꯥꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯃꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯤꯅꯣ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯄꯦꯁꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯀꯅꯥꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯃꯤꯅꯣ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯃꯤ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯄ꯭ꯂꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯃꯐꯝ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯣꯔ ꯗꯨꯀꯥꯟ ꯖꯒꯥ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯕꯤꯜꯗꯤꯡ ꯌꯨꯝ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯦ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯄ꯭ꯂꯦꯁꯅꯤ ꯃꯥꯅ ꯕꯤꯂꯣꯡ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯗꯣ ꯄ꯭ꯂꯦꯁꯅꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯀꯔꯝꯕ ꯃꯈꯜꯗ ꯕꯤꯂꯣꯡ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯃꯦꯆꯤꯟ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯒꯥꯔꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯗꯛ ꯄꯣꯠ ꯆꯩ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯕꯤꯂꯣꯡꯁ ꯇꯨ ꯗ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯃꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛꯅꯦꯅ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯠ ꯇꯧꯗꯣꯏꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯀꯥꯔ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯤꯁ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯗ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯏꯚꯦꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯁꯤꯟꯕ ꯈꯣꯠꯄ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯁꯦꯜ ꯔꯦꯖꯤꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯦꯁꯟ ꯔꯤꯅꯨꯋꯦꯜ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯏꯚꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯅ ꯃꯗꯨꯗ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯗ ꯆꯤꯡꯏ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯣ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯀꯥꯎꯟ ꯑꯣꯐꯤꯁ ꯑꯃꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯀꯥꯎꯟ ꯂꯩ ꯑꯦꯀꯥꯎꯟꯗꯣ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯀꯥꯎꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤꯕꯨ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯄꯥꯏꯕ ꯁꯣꯛꯄ ꯌꯥꯕ ꯄꯣꯠꯂꯅꯦ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯅꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯁꯦꯝꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯀꯣꯔꯁ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ BCA ꯀꯣꯔꯁ MCA ꯀꯣꯔꯁ MSc IT ꯔꯤꯌꯦꯂꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗ ꯂꯩꯕ꯭ꯔꯅꯦ ꯄꯣꯠ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯂꯩꯕ꯭ꯔꯥꯅꯦ ꯂꯩꯇꯦꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯃꯣꯏ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯗ ꯆꯤꯡꯉꯛꯀꯅꯤ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯁꯤ ꯃꯌꯥꯝꯁꯤꯡꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯋꯤ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯌꯨꯁ ꯏꯟ ꯗ ꯏꯌꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝ ꯀꯣ ꯉꯁꯥꯏ ꯔꯦꯛꯇꯦꯡꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯕꯣꯛꯁꯇꯨꯗ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯋꯤ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯌꯨꯁ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯑꯦ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯈꯪꯉꯗ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯑꯉꯥꯡꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯂꯧꯔꯤꯕ ꯑꯉꯥꯡꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯂꯧꯔꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯉꯥꯡꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯦꯕ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯑꯩ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯂꯧꯔꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯉꯥꯡꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯃꯌꯥꯝꯁꯤꯡꯁꯤ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯄ꯭ꯂꯦꯁ ꯑꯣꯞꯖꯦꯛ ꯏꯚꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩ ꯄꯔꯁꯟꯗ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯏꯁꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯄꯦꯁꯦꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯥꯛꯑꯦ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯒ ꯄꯦꯁꯦꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯄꯦꯁꯦꯟ ꯏꯖ ꯑꯦ ꯄꯔꯁꯟ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯑꯣꯔꯒꯅꯥꯏꯖꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯑꯣꯔꯒꯅꯥꯏꯖꯦꯁꯟ ꯑꯃꯗꯩꯗ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯗꯤꯄꯥꯔꯠꯃꯦꯟ ꯋꯥꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯕꯤꯇ꯭ꯋꯤꯟ ꯗ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯗ ꯗꯤꯄꯥꯔꯠꯃꯦꯟ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯋꯥꯔꯛꯁ ꯐꯣꯔ ꯗꯤꯄꯥꯔꯠꯃꯦꯟꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯋꯥꯔꯛ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯅꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯏꯁ ꯗ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯑꯃ ꯗꯤꯐꯥꯏꯟ ꯇꯧꯒꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯗꯤ ꯗꯤꯁ diamond box is used to define the relationship between two or more entities. Okay, and now the strong entity weak entities. Weak entity is a type of entity which does not have its key attribute. Key attribute that means there is no primary key. Key attribute means the primary key. In the weak entity, there is no primary key. The simple definition is it can be identified uniquely by considering the primary key of another entity. Amagi primary key consider tauraga define taudoineba or magi key lehenge haragadi sita dot lakani ko that is called the partial key harakani. Partial key means it is it cannot be defined uniquely for that weak entity. It depends on the another strong entity or entity. So for that weak entity, sets need to have participation. Samna haibda isam samna haibda weak entity je karai de lege tauge hai kanda samna haibda ATM ko ATM amga nanga transaction ai ji karai de taube ai entity haiba transaction ai entity je transaction amne khalal leba laureba. Let's suppose let's take the transaction as an entity. Like concept, we can take concept as an entity. So let's take the transaction is an entity. Transaction depends on ATM. Nang transaction paisa lauthokpa 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 haibjibu nang transaction jibu ATM laitari nang paisa lauthokpa yagadra.
Yaroy.
ATM boot amaga entity ATM boot ama laireba. ATM boot ama laibsida aina transaction tauge hai tadi ATM boot do laitagade transaction tau yaroeba. Si weak relation ne moini leije. Sida withdraw nangna sida relationship maming withdraw haigara adagi withdraw haigara or withdraw harasu yai ko paisa lauthokpagi damakta oitade. Nangi relationship maming je ATM da ATM ID leramani address leramani time leramani nang ATM da paisa lauthokke hai tadi nang transaction haji tawani transaction tawba matam transaction number amount type ado sigi transaction je kaigumba ATM do leramta da tadi transaction je leramaroeba aduna it depends on the ATM da depend taweba aduna siju kai kauge the weak entity and that relationship is here the symbol of the relationship is double diamond box that is weak relationship never samna harabada nang itopa example we can take as loan loan account hairo loan account ji nang kaigumba loan amaji laure loan lawba matamda nang na installment wise paisa ji singeba ado nang loan do larom da tadi nang sai installment ji leiramgadra nang na paisa thakuding single do leiramgadra leirammoy aduduna nang loan laura matungda da only ngasai si ji create tagodamneba je nang loan lawba ji compulsory kasu natteba nang mi khan lawbi ai khan lawdabe adoi tadi that is not mandatory mi khuding account number am legedamni habdi adudi dum mandatory oi bi ai aduga loan lawba habdi di loan je lawra jai lawda jai kai gum lawragadi loan do kari maram nang na tha khuding gi paisa do installment da nang thaman monthly kak toini kakpodo installment do based on loan do da neba loan account do da neba kai gum nang na loan de lawram da di si installment ju lei roeba si mangram ni na si benis tawgineba aduna installment lei ba haje that depends on the loan account in this case this is the loan is the strong entity and the installment is the weak entity and it is represented with the rectangular box double rectangular box sumaina represent to yesira differentiate between strong entity and weak entity si am hangbani ko pekhada jo aduna nga differentiate ta number 1 the quite main point what is the main important point of differentiating between weak and strong entity. Number 1 is the primary key. Then a strong entity ang set high cost set high kaide cost pula apun bagi entity set ko interokoni entity me amdu punjala common property chen by entity me amdu punjala go that is entity set harakko ane. Strong entity always have a primary key. Then my opposite weak entity it doesn't have primary key. It depends on the strong entity. It does not have enough attribute to build a primary key. Simple meaning is it has no primary key. Okay. Second point, the strong entity is represented by a rectangular box. Rectangular box I'm going to represent, but in the case of the weak entity, it is represented by double rectangular box. So double rectangular box and represent. Then, in the case of the strong entity, it contains a primary key represented by the underlined symbol. Underlined symbol na si ATM ATM card ATM ID have the underlined tarogadi that is the primary key. Then, in the case of the weak entity, it contains a partial key which is represented by a just underline symbol. That's underline symbol. The ꯍꯥ ꯕꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯥꯏꯅꯦ ꯁꯥꯕꯨꯒꯤꯗꯤ ꯑꯥ ꯅꯪ ꯑꯉꯣꯝ ꯕꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯇꯥꯏꯞ ꯇꯧꯕꯗ ꯁꯔꯕꯨꯒꯤ ꯊꯣꯛꯂꯛꯑꯅꯤꯌꯦ ꯕꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯁꯥꯔꯒꯤꯗꯣ ꯉꯥꯈꯣꯀꯣ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯛꯀꯦ ꯉꯥꯏꯈꯣꯀꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯕꯨꯕꯨ @nili.gov.in ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯒꯨꯝ ꯇꯧꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯅꯪ nili.gov.in ꯊꯥꯏ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯣ nili.gov.in ꯊꯥꯏ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯕ ꯊꯣꯛꯂꯛꯐꯝ ꯊꯣꯛꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯑꯩ ꯅꯦꯠꯋꯥꯛꯁꯦ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯇꯞꯄꯦ ꯌꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯑꯁ ꯀꯕꯁ ꯑꯣꯟ ꯇꯧ ꯌꯥꯗ꯭ꯔꯦꯗ ꯑꯦꯛꯁꯦꯞ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕꯗꯣ ꯕꯨꯕꯨ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯒꯨꯝ ꯇꯧꯅꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯇꯃꯁꯅ ꯑꯥ ꯌꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯏꯠ ꯀꯟꯇꯦꯟꯁ ꯑꯦ ꯄꯥꯔꯁꯦꯜ ꯀꯤ ꯍꯨꯏꯆ ꯏꯁ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟꯇꯦꯠ ꯕꯥꯏ ꯗꯥꯁ ꯑꯟꯗꯔꯂꯥꯏꯟ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜ ꯗꯣꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯪꯅ ꯇ꯭ꯔꯥꯟꯖꯦꯛꯁꯟ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯦ if you want to make it as a key of this weak entity then it should be represented by dotted line not the straight line okay then number 3 da kay haigare the member of a strong entity set is called the domain entity set my domain harasu khungnebako the member of a weak entity set is called as a subordinate entity set mana subordinate harani sona domain harani then primary key is one of its attributes which helps to identify its member in the weak entity set it is a combination of primary key and the partial key of the strong entity set masai primary key harijidi ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯇ꯭ꯔꯣꯡ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯃꯥꯅ ꯗꯤꯄꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯕꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯄ꯭ꯔꯥꯏꯃꯥꯔꯤ ꯀꯤꯗꯨꯒ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯄꯥꯔꯁꯦꯜ ꯀꯤꯗꯨꯒ ꯀꯝꯕꯤꯅꯦꯁꯟ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯑꯥꯏꯗꯦꯟꯇꯤꯐꯥꯏ ꯇꯧꯋꯦꯕꯀꯣ in the ER diagram the relationship between the strong entity set shown by using a diamond symbol ko magi relationship to diamond symbol na tawni sedi double diamond symbol oirakani ko ngasai sida legido to double diamond symbol oido isam chamba magi entity amaga entity amga relationship ko strong ata oitadi simple diamond shape se that means only one diamond shape amadana double head yaramaba nang adum nasana khangoba haidi weak entity ama yaure habaje angadaba koi the connecting line of the strong entity set with the relationship is single ko the line connecting to the weak entity set identifying relationship is double sida double lakadamne sida ud yawamdre yare hayeng fazana diagram utpa kandaida diagram yappa kanda dum yaholaji kisu kaidre yare attribute edi kai hane haiba ngahan aina haigibido attribute means the property of the table is known as the attribute sidana kai harakadaba the property of an entity harakadaba ko kai gi relational data model dana entity habdo table haina lakani aduna koine attribute se kamai define tawgi the property of a table or the fields of a table are called the attributes here in the case of the ER diagram that the attribute is used to describe the property of an entity amagi property like here sigi magi property ne haira aneba ngasai table ki form na ta tawta di table dugi magi column jing magi field jing ne haiba wan chamani language do atopa ma sijina bawani concept is chamane ko eclipse is used to represent an attribute to sijinabagi damakta sumaina sije ꯁꯤ ꯔꯥꯎꯟꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯁꯤꯝꯕꯣꯜꯁꯦ ꯏꯀ꯭ꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯀꯣ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜꯗ ꯉꯁꯥꯏꯒꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯖ ꯀꯟꯇꯦꯛ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ ꯅꯦꯝ ꯀꯦꯟ ꯕꯤ ꯗ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯑꯣꯐ ꯑꯦ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯦ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ entity ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ having the attributes here. Four attributes are there. First one is ID, phone number, age, name. If we underline here under the ID, then that is the primary key of the attribute. Okay. Then multi-value the double round or that is called the multi-value attribute. Phone number hai kan samna hai nang sida information changba matamda nang single round khot ohanta di, that means nang phone number do only one phone number khak changadaba ko double meme gi phone number ani piba yaroi ba dai di nang kai gumba si je double oramta di more than one changba ya ne ba nang phone number do yare. Key attribute ko key attribute ai di kaino, the key attribute is used to represent the main characteristics of an entity. Key hai ta di, that is the important role ne mana loido samna habda mi mayam dagi je khoina mana key person ko speaker samna habda function am tore mana key person ni mana hana hai ta di, that is mana quite important oiba mi ne haribni. Like that in the attribute also, here we have four attributes here. One important part attribute will be there, that is called the key attribute. That means through that key attribute we can easily define the entity define the key attributes are always having the unique property moi unique property ko it represent a primary key attribute that is the primary key. The key attribute is represented by an ellipse with the text underlined. Eclipse haiba kano wahay ama thinigida aina kari dawina eclipse ka haire ramisna ko underline to see underline to, that is the key attribute, that is the primary key yare ko aduna main characteristic ni, through that we can represent the entity to represent the way. And next the composite key have the, that means sign have the address, and then even name also we can use as a composite key oina name ju sijinaba yaiba kaigino hada name haiba kandaida koina any form of member kandaida first name second middle name last name laitra laiko tabra that means name jisu koina we can have composite ko attribute haiba yai name je adu nangi database, it depends on your database. Okay, nang database create tawbudugi depend tawi ko nang na kaigumba, if you are going to store the first name last name middle name, then the attribute type of the name should be composite attribute ogadaba ko adaida kida composite attribute haita di, that means further subdivided or yabdo men thugaiba yabdo attribute. An attribute that composed of many other attribute is known as composite attribute harijittu attribute me an punjalaga semba haido name the first name middle name last name si punjalaga name ama semeba ko isam samna habada aigi ming hairo khumanthem rekha devi. Khumanthem is the first name, rekha is the middle name, last the devi. So adu punjalaga aigi ming name nangi naming hairo haiba matamda ina khumanthem rekha devi haini haiba matamda ida adu sema ine haiba isam samna habada. An attribute that composed of many other attributes is known as composite attribute. The composite attribute is generally is represented by an ellipse. See rounds, and those ellipses are connected with an ellipse. To see ma'am, atopa ellipse ma'am ga connect away. Multi-valued attribute, that means the multiple values, the attribute that have multiple values. An attribute can have more than one values. These attributes are known as the multi-valued attribute. The double oval is used to represent multi-valued attribute. Multi-valued attribute represent the inside have the phone number. Phone number, every person or person can have more than one phone number. That means the value is more than one. That's why we can represent. It can be represented through the double ellipse. Then derived attribute. Derived means it is derived from based on another attribute. An attribute that can be derived from other attribute is known as the derived attribute. It can be represented by ꯗ꯭ꯌꯥꯁ ꯗꯥꯁ ꯏꯂꯤꯞꯁ ꯁꯤꯒꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯁꯦ based on the date of birth ꯑꯃ base ꯇꯧꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ derive ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯇꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ an attribute that can be derived from other attribute is known as derived attribute. It is represented by the dash ellipse. A person as changes over time change can be derived from the another attribute like date of birth. Date of birth might derive never. ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯁꯤꯕꯨ ꯈꯔ ꯋꯥꯠꯂꯤ ꯑꯃꯅꯤꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯋꯥꯠꯂꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ simple attribute or atomic attribute kind amani wali ko simple hai tadi or atomic hai tadi samna have the it cannot be further subdivided amon thuga yadraba ko samna have the first name je amu thuga yari bro na sida mo ha
ꯌꯥꯔꯣꯏ
yadre adu case di si first name je that is called the simple or atomic character atomic attribute and maina amu definition pibe yai ko yare si attribute book tora jinga si खरंगा सिरी खर थूना चटला माले इसे जरा जरा ज्ञान दी ताबरा तादबरा
टाइम
ताई को तादबजिंग हाइरो को तादबजिंग अमुक तोंगाना अमुक कन तौगे जे हेंग डायग्राम येकपजे या डायग्राम येकपदा लो या सिनलाक्तोनी अदुना अइना ए फोन नंबर दी मल्टी वैल्यू हेलो नत्रगा सही दुदी केनो हेलो डिराइव एट्रिब्यूट हेलो हाइबो कान नै सिंबल दुदा नैना खंगनबगी वानी को कंडीशन अदुम पीबे याब नत्र कंडीशन पीदरजु नंग अदुम वखंदा सागचरजु याब एफसीडी मल्टी वैल्यू अगदमनी सिंगल वैल्यू अगदमनी को हाय अदुमाइना यार सिबो तोरजिंग सिगिदि आई नोटिस सि पुलब लोरगा थागलागे को सिगी रिलेशन जी ताकु लोरकान थागलागे
ओ याई में
मथंग क्लास तदि लोरने देत कान थागलागे यार सिलोइसलजी नोगी अटेंडेंस हापे थारम